So here I am in Excel 2013. I've run the setup script for Lab 8, so I've created some data sources. And now I'm going to use Data Explorer, which has been installed on this virtual machine, to connect to the database and get some data from it. Now obviously I can use Data Explorer to connect to lots of different data sources. You can see in this from other sources list, there's a real wide variety of different sources that your users can get data from to do all sorts of different types of analytics and mashups. In the demo we're just going to use the local SQL Server database because that's what we have. And the first thing it asks me to do is which database do I want to connect to, and I'm going to just enter the name of the database instance. And because this is the first time I've connected to that instance, it's going to ask me about the credentials I want to use and what sort of encryption I want to use. In this demo environment we'll just simply use unencrypted. Obviously in a production environment we might want to encrypt the credentials, and off it goes and connects, and we start this process of building a query. So in Data Explorer we have effectively a wizard that lets me shape the data that I want to bring back from the data source. So the first thing is to say I want to look at the AW data warehouse in that database instance, and it lists the various tables and views that are available to me, and I'm going to bring back the data from the products view that I've created earlier on, and it brings back a subset of that data, so I get a preview of what I'm doing as I work through the wizard. Now there's a number of columns in this table obviously, and there are some towards the end that are really there just as metadata columns for handling slowly changing dimensions as I load the data warehouse. I'm not really interested in them for analysis, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove those columns from the query. And I'm left with the data that might be useful for analysis, and I can simply at that point click Done, and the data gets loaded down into into a new worksheet. Actually, you'll see it's created sheet 2 down here, and the query settings pane appears here, and I could go back in and edit that query that I've created to filter out columns or make other changes to it. It names it query 1 by default. I'm going to change that just to make it something a little bit more useful. So I'll call it products so that I know what that query actually returns. So that's a really simple query that just simply effectively just selected a table and filtered out a few columns. Let's do a slightly more interesting query. I can go back to my Data Explorer tab, and again I can bring in data from any other data source and you know, combine all of the data in the workbook. In this instance we'll just go back to the same source that we used previously, so we'll go to our MIA SQL DW database server, and again we'll go back into that database there, and this time I'm more interested in the internet sales table, and we'll do something a little more interesting with this time. What I'm going to do is I'm only really interested in the product key column and also the sales amount and the order date. So I'm holding the control key and selecting all of those columns, and I'll just remove all the other columns so that I'm left with those 3 columns that I'm particularly interested in. Now in terms of the order date, I don't actually care about the individual dates. What I want to do eventually is to aggregate sales by year. So I'm going to transform this column so that instead of returning the full date, it just simply returns the year. And that's going to be coming back as an integer value, and just to make life easy for myself later on, I'm going to change the data type of that from being a number to being text, and it goes ahead and left aligns that just to indicate that that's text. And I'll change the column name as well, just to make it clear what that column actually contains. So now I've got my product key, the sales amount for that product key, and the year, but obviously there's still a line for each individual sales transaction. So what I want to do is I want to group the sales, and it's easy enough to do that. I can go in and choose group by. It's going to group by year, and then I'm also going to add a second group by clause so that we group by the product key. So we go year, product key, and I want to display the total revenue for each product over each year. So, and I'm going to calculate that by using the sum function on the sales amount column. So if I go ahead and make those changes, I end up with a query that returns the year, the product key and the total revenue for that product in that year, and that's what gets returned by that query. So we can go ahead and finish off there, and that data gets returned into Excel. And again, it's given it a default name of query 1, so I'm going to change that to yearly sales, just to make it a little bit more clear what that's about. And you can see how I could keep going through and just effectively adding worksheets with data from different data sources. But actually, it's slightly more powerful than that. Rather than just simply downloading these into sheets, I'm going to say, look, I don't particularly want to download this data. I want to define the query, but I don't necessarily want to use it to download data into the workbook. I'm going to actually use that query as a lookup, because what I'm really interested in is bringing back the products and combining that with the aggregated sales for each year for the product. So if I go back to my products query, which is here, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to merge some of the data from this. And I'm going to merge products based on the product key with my yearly sales query, again based on the product key. And the wizard in the background goes and matches 130 out of the first 506 rows, so clearly there is some correlation going on there. And we'll go ahead and we'll choose OK on that. So it now starts to create another query that's the result of a merge of two previously defined queries. And if I scroll towards the end of this set of results, you can see that it's added a new column with this table option here. And what effectively that's doing is saying, well, this is a parent-child result set. You've got a row for each product, and then for each product there's a table that contains the sales for each year that product was sold in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name of the column first of all, just to be something a bit more suitable. So it's sales in this instance. And I'm also going to expand that column out. You can see there's a little icon here, which if I hover should say expand, but doesn't. Take my word for it. If I click it, I get the option to expand out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand that column out so that instead of it being a child table, it actually just brings in the year and the total revenue, or total revenue as I appear to have typed. So we'll go ahead and do that. And you can see that it brings in, for each product there, we've got the sales year and we've got the sales total. And obviously there are some products that we've never sold. So to make life a little bit easier for myself there, I'm going to filter out those ones where the sales year is null. Oh, done that the wrong way around. So now we're only including products that we have actually sold. And just to make life even easier for myself, I'm going to sort this into the order of product key, so that we're seeing the products returned in order. And effectively there's a row for each year that a product was sold with the sales total for that year. So that's now what I'm returning back from that query. So we'll go ahead and finish that one there. And it again gets brought down. This time the default name is slightly different because it's a merge query. It gets the name merge1, but I'm going to change that anyway. So we'll change that to product sales, and we'll capitalize the P. So great. Well, I've now used Data Explorer to go and fetch a number of data results down from queries, and I've actually merged the results of two of those queries to give me a complete result set for analysis. What I can do obviously is just work with that in the worksheet, but rather than leave it there, I'm going to say, well, don't load that to the worksheet. Instead, load it into the data model. Because every Excel workbook has a tabular data model. That's what we edit when we use the Power Pivot add-in. So it's gone ahead and added that to the tabular data model, which means now if I go back to sheet 1, which is empty, it's never had anything in it, and I decide I want to create some sort of pivot table here, well, I can get external data. It seems slightly non-intuitive that this is external data because the data model is actually in the workbook itself. But if we go into there and choose external data, you can see get the data from the tables in the workbook data model, which has one table, so that includes the table that I've obviously just added to that. And if I open that up and tell it I want a pivot table report, off it goes. You can see I've got this little icon here that shows me the product sales table is coming from the data model. It's automatically added other tables of data in the workbook into the model for me, but this is the only one I'm interested in. and I want the product category name, and I want the sales year, and I want the total revenue, and lo and behold, I can now start using the results of those queries that I've merged together to actually start creating a pivot table and analyzing the data. So hopefully that is useful to you.